At exactly 8 o'clock when I close this program, I take full-time employment with an electricity generation company. It means that as a host of this program, I have got a strong vested interest in the story that we're going to discuss this morning. It is only professional for me to declare my conflict of interest, but only say that my understanding and knowledge of the electricity sector as it is does not in any way affect the way I do my work when I host the big story on Morning at 10 TV. But besides, you be the judge of this program this morning. Have a good morning. Looking at the two gentlemen with me here, I have got Julius Wandera, who is the, now you've got a very huge post, but whose names I don't possibly understand, but I can easily say you are the publicist of the Electricity Regulatory Authority. Good morning, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Simon.
I have with me Vianney Mutiaba, Principal Financial Analyst with the Electricity Regulatory Authority. The guy who says less, but says quite a lot with his pen and calculator. You're the guy that's responsible for these calculations that bring forward these electricity tariff regimes that, for the most part, are not palatable to the consumer. Good morning.
Morning, Simon.
It's a good morning on your side.
Very good.
Why did he increase tariffs? Let's start with you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good morning to the viewers of NTV. Basically, if I'm to speak one statement, the reason the prices have gone up is because of the movement in the exchange rate. The Ugandan shilling has depreciated against the US dollar from the time we started doing the base tariff for this year in November 2014, when the rate was at 2,780. The Ugandan shilling has lost 31%. The exchange rate now we are looking at is 3,658 for the quarter of the last quarter of this year, which is quarter 4. So the reason the tariff is going up is because the Ugandan shilling has depreciated against the US dollar.
For how long can we peg our livelihood to some of these swings, which for the most part we have no control over, with especially a foreign currency? Is that a sign of independence? Can't you, as an electricity regulatory authority, buttress the effects of these exogenous forces to spare us this whole higi-haga of, the dollar gets a cold, we catch an incredible cough across the country?
Thank you, Simon. Maybe I should first explain to the viewers why the tariff is adjusted for the movement in FX.
Perhaps there.
You see, what happens
is you call it for FX?
Foreign exchange.
Okay, please, you speak a language people understand.
Thank you, Simon, for foreign exchange. So what happens is that if you're going to build a power plant like Bujagali or Eskom or Mpanga or Bogoi, any of these power plants, the capital that is needed to put up that infrastructure is huge. So maybe you need $800 million to build Bujagali, and you're going to finance it through debt and equity, and mainly the ratios we are looking at is the projects are financed by 70 to 80% debt. So if you need $700 million in debt to build up Bujagali, then you need to go to the banks, to the commercial banks or financial institutions to raise financing. So the challenge we have in Uganda is that if you look at raising $700 million, there is no bank in Uganda that can give you $700 million.
Well, in this case now we're getting such money from Exim Bank. Even the UK is now getting money from Exim Bank for much of the infrastructure projects and all that, which should in essence bring down the cost of repayment. And now rather than look at what caused these issues with the Bujagali construction, let's look at Isimba and Karuma that are coming online. When these finally come in with this kind of financing that's coming in from a cheaper lender, do we hope to see some kind of insulation on the tariff against such volatile movements within the money market?
Well, Simon, just before Vienna concludes, even if it's coming from Exim Bank, they're not actually giving us Uganda shillings.
They're giving us US dollars.
They're giving us US dollars.
And so when there is a change in the rate, it doesn't affect us. But when you increase domestic consumption unit by 109 Ugandan shillings, Julius, I mean, from where you sit as a person that should really, create confidence with the consumers, are you powering development, or are you simply deterring people from consuming that product?
You see, the determination of which threshold goes to which consumer is done through what Vianney can explain, something called cost allocation. Okay? If giving Simon a cost requires so much from me as opposed to giving Simon a service requires so much from me as opposed to giving Vianney a service, then I will allocate the costs of giving a service to Simon as are different from the costs of allocating a service to Vianney. Explain that simple thing.
Yeah, the way the costs are recovered is through a cost allocation mechanism. The cost of providing a service to a domestic consumer is very different to the cost of providing a service to an industrial consumer. But also putting that aside, under the domestic consumers, we have what we call a lifeline tariff. Now, the first 15 units of your consumption are charged at 150 shillings per kilowatt hour, and that has not been increased. Now, we have over 35,000 households that are consuming within the first 15 units, and your bill is around 6,000, including VAT. So when we leave the domestic, then we go to the industrial
So this
customers.
stock of the ordinary consumer, the lowest of the low, does not really come into play because the lowest of the low consumes within the other lifeline.
Yeah. It's actually a casual talk, which is not backed by evidence. But if you went down to look through these people's consumption, those guys consume within the lifeline, they can survive. Even my mother in Buyondo, where power reached recently, who consumes within the lifeline, her bill will be within those measures, VN is from about 6,000, 7,000 and below. Because what are they using power for? To power and probably to iron, to get light and to iron and charge their phones. That's all.
But before we get that on the what we call the conduct of a consumer, or what you may want to say responsible usage of this power, because of course the realization is that for the most part, the most noisy people will find that 40% of their bill is actually electricity they did not really use, they only simply spent. Let's get down to you as the Electricity Regulatory Authority. Away from this volatility of the dollar and all that, what else informs how you come about with the tariff increase? I mean, we've not seen a tariff reduction substantially. When it does, it's by a few cents. When it increases, it goes up by hundreds of shillings. Why do we do that?
Thank you very much, Simon. You see, the whole methodology and how the tariff is computed is that the tariff is computed to recover the costs of providing the service.
So are you saying that if the dollar goes back to normal and Dr. Mutevira and his group stabilize the fiscal arrangements in the country and we go back to our 2,700, you will reduce the tariff backwards to almost that?
That is correct. And that happened in...
Or you act like these other guys at the pump where, you know, fuel prices never really go down.
And the taxi guys.
Simon, that happened in April 2014. Actually, when the Ugandan shilling appreciated against the US dollar in April and July 2014, we actually reduced the tariff. So I want the consumers also to watch us. The rate is now at 3,658, and if the Ugandan shilling appreciates, we are most likely to see a reduction in the tariff.
Let's get down to you, Julius, to tell us about, you know, what a consumer ought to do to ensure that they at least stay with their lights on against this increment. I mean, we can traverse it perhaps, but is there some kind of responsible living that consumers ought to know so that they are able to consume within their means and pay for electricity they actually use to construct it?
There is absolutely responsible living, like you're saying, Simon. But maybe before I answer that, what I would like to say is the times are not very easy. So for us to jump on the streets and cry and say the power tariff is up doesn't help us. It actually boils down to responsible living. How do you use power in your house? Recently, we've been giving out LED bulbs. We're looking at congested feeders to try to reduce the load. That bulb, by being on your roof, helps you cut down the cost of lighting. But you find people who have got so many rooms, some of them that are not occupied. Each socket, they don't want the lights. Each socket is actually on. All the lights are on. They have so many lights around and appliances and in the house. Basically, like you said, electricity which is oozing through their meters, but which is not being used. It just calls for responsible use of electricity. Make sure you actually use it when you need it. Switch it on when you need it. When you don't. And then our friends in the industrialists, Vianney can tell you that we have incentivized them to leave the congested periods of working and go to the off-peak. And that's going to help them manage their businesses, okay? The times are not very easy, when we accept that. But I want Ugandans to know that Electricity Regulatory Authority is not there to increase power tariffs for the pleasure of it. We're trying to ensure that this light remains on. We're trying to ensure that we don't start hearing stories of schedules of load shedding again. Otherwise, if the tariff does not appreciate the way it has done, then we're not going to have electricity in the next few months.
No, but you may need to just draw the nexus for the viewers to understand what is the nexus between a hiked tariff and load shedding for that matter. We thought load shedding is caused by the absence of enough generation capacity vis-a-vis the demand.
Very good.
So how does your electricity tariff have to play in the realm of load shedding?
Very good. You see, an electricity tariff, like Vianney said, is set to recover the costs of generating electricity. Now, if a tariff is set at a level where it cannot recover the costs, it means that
the generators will
the generators will not, there will not be enough money to pay the generators. And when generators cannot be paid, they also have loan obligations. Like he said, they borrow money. What are they going to do? They're going to start saying, well, if you can't pay me, then I can't waste my time running my turbines. They're going to switch off their turbines. And when they switch off, you don't have enough power. When you don't have enough power, you start rationing, load shedding. Say Jinja is off, Kampala is off, Mukono is on. Things like that. So the tariff is actually reviewed or appreciated to ensure that it raises enough money to keep every player within the sector, okay, doing their role. The tariff is there to help generation, like ESCOM, like Bujagal, to do their work. Is there to help transmission do their work. Is there to help Umeme do their work.
Well,
but there is a false conception thinking that it's Umeme raising it. No, the component of Umeme's money in this tariff is very small. They take about 20% or something like that.
28%.
28%. The rest of the money goes to generation companies.
No, even transmission, please don't just make
well,
it.
transmission has about 5% or something like that.
So in other words, what you're trying to say is that the cost of generating electricity in this country continues to grow higher, and yet, of course, we are blessed with, the natural setting up of resources like rivers that are able to hydropower our needs. Question is now that we're having new power plants in the pipeline that will be coming online perhaps in the next couple of years. Do we hope to see some bit of amelioration?
Simon, thank you very much. We expect actually to see that as the new power plants come on. But you see, the portion of 68% to 70% being part of the coming from generation is not an anomaly in itself, because even other countries like Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, that's how it is. So it's normal.
And talking about the benchmarking on other countries, especially with regard to that percentage that goes in for generation, one would also love to understand our tariff regime compared to other countries in the East African region. How do we fare? Because, of course, we are looking at the integration of our businesses and all that. We're even looking at synchronizing our grids to ensure that we have one super grid across the East African region. Where are we playing in terms of tariff? Is our tariff so high? Because I've had people argue that, it's cheaper to run a domestic household arrangement in Rwanda with regard to electricity than it is in Uganda.
Thank you, Simon. Actually, for me, I don't think it is correct for us to compare domestic tariffs.
Okay, let's look at
because you cannot shift to go and stay in Rwanda because of power tariffs.
You have no idea what motivates people to shift to other countries.
But looking at the
people would go to
tariff,
Rwanda to live there for even worse reasons than just electricity.
Looking at the industrial tariff, the very large consumers, our tariff is the lowest in the region.
Oh, really?
It's comparable to Tanzania. Kenya is the second lowest, then Rwanda is the highest. And what we are going through now has also been happening in other countries. Starting 1st September, Rwanda increased its tariff by 35%. We are looking at 19. Kenya this month has increased. You see,
by how much?
I think it's around 10%. But you see, what the challenge we are addressing is not Ugandan, because the South African rand has hit its lowest against the US dollar.
True that.
The Kenyan shilling has hit its lowest against the dollar. Tanzania is depreciated. The naira in Nigeria has depreciated. It is.
I mean, there were prayers. Is it in
Zambia had national prayer days
to save their
currency.
So it is affecting the whole of Africa and other emerging economies, and this is where we find ourselves.
But to the extent of national development, I mean, doesn't it really bother you as a regulator of this sector, which for the most part is billed as one that will power the economy, literally? That you're having a tariff that possibly may not so much be attractive in the sense that you possibly, the government on one side through UIA is calling around for investors to come here and set base and all that. But you're having a power tariff that is, to some extent, some people say is not very attractive to foreign investments. And in a seesaw kind of movement, one side is attracting, the other side is disincentivizing.
You see, Simon, and I can say categorically that if it were possible, we would have loved that this tariff is even half or quarter of what it is. But the circumstances we are living in, the present circumstances, do not allow us to live that wishful life. Now, you know, government of Uganda has spent a lot of money in trying to develop alternative sources of energy. Like you talked about the Karumas and the Isimbas. We have lots of hopes that when these big power projects come online, they'll help us significantly to push the end user tariff down. And that should work well with our industrialists. And we've been in lots of negotiations and discussions with industrialists. You remember the president said he wants a 5-cent tariff for industrialists. We have that directive. And we gave government what they would call a tariff path, a movement of how we'll get there. And industrialists know it about themselves. So we are all working and looking forward to have this tariff come down to what the president pledged to industrialists. And we're thinking that probably in the next 3-4 years, this should be applicable. So we are looking forward to that renewable, to that cheap source of electricity to help us ameliorate the situation, like to borrow your own word, like you said.
Well, as we conclude this program, of course, we are looking at the outlook. I mean, you, Vianney, you are the guy that looks at, you know, projections and all that. Can the country brace itself for a worse situation? Will it first get worse before it gets better? Can we see, do we hope to see another increment, perhaps before Christmas?
Not before Christmas.
Not before Christmas.
Because, you know, we are in a very volatile situation. We're getting into the big days, so to speak, and the big days are going to be tagged along with the electioneering. And of course, you know what inflation is going to look like. You saw the central bank announcing an increment in the CBR. So all these don't seem to augur well with regard to your, you know, the realm where you play in the finances. So what should Ugandans brace themselves for?
No, Simon, if you can tell me where the exchange rate will be in December and where fuel prices will be, I'll tell you where the tariff is. Because I can tell you that no one thought that the exchange rate would reach 3,600, even
in their lifetime.
In their lifetime. So if you can tell me where the exchange rate will be in December, I can tell you where the tariff is. But right now, I cannot be on NTV, on national TV, and I tell Ugandans that this is where the tariff will be. But the assurance that I can give the Ugandans is that if the Ugandan shilling appreciates against the US dollar, we shall definitely see a reduction in the tariff.
And if nothing happens, you're also giving us the assurance that this quarter, until the end of the year, for example, we will not see another increment coming in from your side.
No, certainly there's not going to be. Until the end of the year, there's not going to be an increment. However, we do annual tariff reviews in preparation for the next year. And just one of the things I would like to say, I know you're about to close, is we do not work independent of government. All the decisions we take, we're in consultation with the government. Government advises on the way for us on the way forward, and that's what we take. So whether the exchange rate reaches 6,000 per dollar, well, you have a government to manage the situation.
And if the government, for example, is looking at staying longer than 2016 February, they possibly could also issue a directive to ensure that maybe we, the voters, can be given a lower rate than we possibly want. Would you take such a thing as a feasible?
No, the government is very interested in making sure that you are able to live your life and it's able to grow the economy without jeopardizing any.
Our final shot on this one, Vianney, and looking at the power tariff increment that for the most part do affect, operations both of industrial and domestic users. As a regulator, is everything okay in the sector with regard to, say, for example, Umeme is always crying at technical and other losses? How are you, playing within that frame? Because you see, part of their losses also do affect, to some extent, how your tariff regime is structured.
Thank you.
That is possible because you should have asked Umeme directly how they are working on their losses, but certainly you as a regulator can give us an indication when you have all these GMC discussions and all that, how it comes into play.
Okay, well, thank you, Simon. The losses have reduced significantly. We have made a lot of progress. In 2005, the losses were at 35%. The loss target that we are using in the tariff now is
10 years later.
0.3%. Next year we are going to 16.9. By 2018 we are going to 14.7%. So there is no other country that has done it in the region. KPLC, its losses at 16.9.
KPLC?
The Kenya Power Lighting Company Limited.
The Umeme of Kenya.
The Umeme of Kenya. Its losses at 16.9%, and they have been stagnant at that level for the last 5 years. They have failed to make any progress. But in Uganda, we've done a lot of progress, and next year we shall be beating them.
Concluding it, Julius, of course there will be cry and hue. I mean, the public is unforgiving when tariffs really go up, and you as a publicist of ERA and perhaps working very closely with those in the sector, you have a Herculean task ahead of you to educate people beyond just what the tariff increment does mean. But you see, you're talking to an already charged populace that is feeding the pitch
from everywhere.
I mean, how prepared are you to face the public? And
No, like you said, one, you've given us this very beautiful audience to speak to those who are viewing or are watching, but we're going to go out and explain to Ugandans using every means and fora possible. And one of the things I have learned is once people have information, then information builds opinions in their heads. We are going to speak to Ugandans and tell them the reason why the tariff has had to appreciate. But we'll also give them options. Like in the process of consultation, we had options to tell them, what should we do? There are 1, 2, 3, 4 options.
My colleagues here, Joe and Brian, did say there were no consultation for this particular tariff.
Well, but you see, Brian keeps saying such things everywhere he is. With the options are very clear. We can actually keep the tariff at the level it is. And what will be the option?
We'll need 42 billion.
We'll need 42 billion. Where will it come from?
As subsidies. And I don't think there is anyone who wants, well, of course, you, as many of us love subsidies from government, but do you really want to go to
Do you want to go to government? One is that we've been to government, and government doesn't have the money. Government has assured us, make sure the sector is running non-stop, but there is no money for subsidies. But in the event that government say, let's give you subsidies, someone you know where subsidies will come from.
Our taxes.
Tomorrow there will be a tax on sugar, there will be a tax on soap, there will be a tax on kerosene, and then you will be paying it yourself.
And there will be a few drugs missing from hospitals.
Absolutely, a few drugs missing.
Well, it's a vicious cycle here. It's a conundrum, so to speak. But one thing is for sure, electricity tariffs have gone up as a result of volatility in the foreign exchange market. The Uganda shilling, like many other currencies across the African region, falling against the US dollar, and that is a situation that the Electricity Regulatory Authority has got to grapple with, ensuring that the sector keeps running and remains self-sustaining. Let's take a short one and return, is my opinion. I don't really think technically I have anything more useful to add to what the two gentlemen in the studio have spoken into with regard to the increment of the tariff, looking at a 19% increment, which brings the domestic consumer to pay some 109 shillings extra on that unit of electricity. Now, what I can only say is something to speak into the responsible use of this resource called electricity. One thing is for sure, electricity is a huge necessity. We need it to power our lives, both at industrial and personal level. But also the sustainable use of it is very important. So that at the end of the day, what we actually pay for is what we actually use. Julius did hint on something to the effect that many of us find very weird ways of consuming this electricity in ways more than benefits us. You have your lights on when you don't need them, you're running a huge voltage security light. When was the last time you checked the wattage of your flat iron before you bought it? When was the last time you checked the wattage of any appliance before you bought it? Why are your sockets switched on even when there's no appliance plugged inside there? Why are you ironing at exactly 7 p.m. when you could actually iron the same for half the price after 11 p.m.? And you know, all these you may have as a consumer look into your consumption patterns to ensure that you play a role in ensuring that whatever you pay for is what you actually use it. That way you'll be able to survive or even thrive within this regime of high tariffs that may not seem to see an end in sight pretty soon. Have a wonderful and productive day. And of course, like we already say here, it's the collective sum of responsibility and productivity that you and I put together that will spur this country to the greater heights that we all clamor to be in. Have a tremendous day.